Welcome to our fourth masterclass. Today we're going to be looking at Jadu Directories. Directories is one of the features of the CMS that gets used fairly widely, but we thought it would be useful to run a session on it to just talk in a bit more detail about some of the things that you can do with directories. So the main idea of directories is it gives you the ability, wherever you want to create sort of a searchable data set of records for customers to look at, whether that's a directory of policies or a directory of more location-based things like libraries or parks or a job vacancies directory. The idea is that you can spin these up very easily within the platform and make that content available as a searchable data set for customers. Through today, I'm just going to be using a sort of business directory as an example. So we'll use a sort of consistent data set as we work through. We're going to look at a number of things in relation to directories. We're going to talk about sort of the basics around setting up a directory, how you can configure that directory manually, and also how you can generate a directory using an import from a CSV file. We'll also then touch on how you can enable public submission of data to a directory, and how you can do that either just through the standard directories functionality or how you can actually do that through a form submission, and how you can also pull data back from directories into forms if you need to, if you're using Jadu's Forms platform. Directory sits within the publishing module. So when I go into directories, you'll see there's a couple here that I've set up just for today's session, but we'll come back to these a bit later. So if I'm going to create a directory in the platform, I'll select the new directory platform. I'll give my directory a name. As with all content, I'll assign a category to it. I can assign some metadata. I can put some descriptive content in. I'm just going to grab some placeholder content. So this will actually appear on the main directory page as a bit of introductory text explaining what that directory is. Let me grab the text properly. And then you have a couple of fields here which really relate to public submission of data. So if you want to enable members of the public to submit records to the directory, so for example, if it's a local businesses directory, you might want businesses themselves to be able to submit their details and then manage those details, then you can simply put in an email address to receive notifications whenever a directory record is submitted by a member of the public, and then you can switch on the public submission option. So once we've deployed the directory, I'll come back to this and explain in a bit more detail how it works. Obviously, if it's a directory of sort of purely organizational information, maybe it's a directory of your policies or something like that, then you wouldn't switch on public submission, but it is a tool that can be useful. If I save those details, at this point, it then gives me a number of tabs that I can use to go in and actually set my directory up. So if I was going to do this manually, the first thing I would want to do is go in and create my fields for capturing the data. So if I select fields, I can add a new field. I can give my field a title, and I can then decide what type of component I want to use for it. So for something like business name, we could maybe just make it a plain text box. I could then add a description field. So for this one, I could either use a text area or potentially our HTML field, which would then give you lots of formatting options as well. Let's leave it as a text area. I'm going to add a field in for website. I'm actually going to add this as a text box. We do have a specific field for link, and there's a specific field for email. Now, these fields are there as they're quite legacy fields, really. These days, if you're adding a link, we'd normally recommend using something like if you're just putting the URL in, maybe a text box. Maybe if you wanted to format that link a bit more, you could use something like an HTML field. Let's select HTML field so we can show you how that works. I'll add in a field for address. Let's make it a text area. Email. We'll add email as a text box. It should pick it up automatically that it's an email address and format it as an email link. And then we'll add in the final one for telephone. We'll leave that as a text box as well. With fields, you do have a number of options around them. So if you are wanting to, you can actually make fields invisible. So you can use fields to pop data into the directory that maybe you want to use for the directory search to latch onto. So maybe it doesn't need to be visible as part of the record, but it needs to be there as some invisible data that sits in the background. So you can make a field invisible. Equally, you can decide if you want to display the title of the field or not. This is sometimes useful if you've taken the approach of importing your data, and maybe you've got an address that's split over a number of columns in your CSV file. You could effectively rename the first address field as address, and then you could hide the title on the other fields that are generated so that it almost looks like one block. If you're enabling public submission of data, or just if you've got maybe a third party managing the content within the directory, you can decide which field should be mandatory. You do have some positioning options, and for things like text box and text area, you can put in a default value as well if you want to. So I'm going to save those. So this effectively then gives me the structure for my data. So if I was going to go in and add a record, I can go to records, I'll create a new record, and I can go in and then add a business to the directory. Categories and metadata will be inherited from the main directory settings, so you don't normally need to worry about those, but I will come back to categories in a moment to talk about how you can use categories that are specific to the directory to organize content within the directory. So I'll give my record a title. I've also got a separate field for business name, so I'm just going to put the same information in there. Put in some text. Let's see. So here I added that HTML field. So with the HTML field, you actually get the full rich text editor for formatting your content. Press in, and let's put it now. So I'm consciously not going to put anything in the telephone field, so I can show you something with that. And then I can decide whether to make my record live or not. So I'm going to save my first record in my directory. Now at the moment, although this says live, it won't actually be live because I've not made the directory live. So let me just go and do that. So if I go to the overview tab, I've got the option here to make my directory live. So if I do that, if I go to actions and view live, you can see my directory. Sorry, the formatting on my test system's not very good. But you can see here's my text description. I've got an option to view the A to Z of records. So if I go in there, I'll probably just have one record under J for Jadu. I've got the option to submit a new record to the business directory as a member of the public, which we'll come back to in a moment. And I've got a simple keyword search, so I can search the directory. If I search for the word design, then it will return Jadu's record because the word design is in the description. And if I go into that record, it gives me the basic information that I need. Now, if I wanted to enable a location-based search in my directory, then I can use a Google Map field to add data to the directory record. And when I add a Google Map field, it will then, because it then becomes location-based information, it will automatically provide me with a postcode search so that I can search the directory using my postcode, and then it will show me a list of records that are within a certain vicinity of my address. So if I go back into my directory, I go to fields, I'm going to add a new field in. Let's call this one location. Add it as a Google map. Want it to be visible. I'm actually going to put it after the website field and before the address. So if I do that, it will give me, when I go in to create a record, the ability to do a postcode lookup or to enter some latitude and longitude coordinates. And when it displays a pin, I can drag that pin around on the map. So I'll show you that in the public view in a moment. The other thing with maps is you can go in and adjust your settings. So with the Google Maps field, it will give you a choice of Google's pins in terms of which pin you want to use to pinpoint the location. So I might pick one. And I can decide what information I want to display when someone clicks on that pin in the record. So let's say maybe business name and description. And then also whether I want to show results on a map when someone searches the directory. So let's say yes to that as well. So if I come back here and refresh my businesses page, you can see I now have a postcode search. Okay, so we've got a few questions coming in. Is there a way to preview directory records before making them live? No, there isn't currently. Effectively, directory records potentially will all look the same. And in a lot of cases, we find that people will be creating directories using an import with thousands of records in them. So preview is not really something that's included in directories at the moment. However, if it's something that you felt was important, you could raise it as a suggestion on our suggestions board. Is there any built-in protection against the use of script tags in HTML fields? I can check that for you. I'll take that away and check with the developers. Can the directory description be made so it uses HTML? No, it can't do that. The way around that we find a lot of people do is if they want a more rich text formatted description, then they would use something like a homepage and add a content widget and the directory search widget to that homepage so they can craft more of a sort of structured landing page for it. Can you put in multiple email addresses for notifications? Yes, you should be able to just comma separate them. Postcode is added automatically to search. Can you disable it? It's only added in the latest Jadu templates if you are using the Google Maps field. So if you don't have the Google Maps field in the directory, it won't display the postcode field. Potentially, if you're on the older sort of legacy Jadu template set before the Photon templates were released, then that will always show the postcode search. What radius does postcode search cover? I believe it's 5 miles, but I can check that. And I think we can also adjust that essentially on a case-by-case basis. Is keyword still mandatory when searching by postcode? No, you can just search for a postcode. You don't have to search for a keyword. Is it possible to hide directory structure tabs from an administrator? No, that's not possible at the moment. If you have access direct to directories, you have access to the whole directory. What we find sometimes is if people need to add records, they might do it via a form submission, or do it via the public submission, but there's not really an ideal solution for that. But yeah, normally we find that directories is something that tends to be closely managed by more of a central web team. Okay, so let me go in. So we've enabled postcode search. So let me go and add a new record. So let me add a record as a member of the public. So if I click submit a new record, it's going to take me to sign into my account. So you have to register for an account to be able to submit a record as a member of the public. That's either an account in using Jadu's standard marketing module, or if you're a Jadu Connect user, it would be the Jadu Connect account. So if I go to submit a new record now, you'll see it basically produces a form based on the directory settings. So I can go in, let's add a second record for Jadu. You can see here I've got my map. So if I actually grab the postcode and search the map, I can then drag the pin and drop it where I need to. Let me grab the address. And the email. Again, I'm just going to leave telephone blank. I'll come back to that in a second. So if I submit this as a record, it's potentially going to give me an error because of the way my test system works. But if I go to my account page, you can see that I've got a directory record that I've submitted that's not been approved yet. I can see that on my account page, and it will tell me what the record title is and which directory I've submitted it to. So as a user managing that directory, I would hopefully have received the email notification to say that a new public record's been submitted. And if I then go into my directory and go to fields, sorry, records, there will be a user records awaiting approval filter. And there I can see the record that's waiting to be published. So I can go in and check that. And if I'm happy with it, I can say, yes, I want to make it live. If I jump back into the front end, I've now got two records. If I go to my second one, you can see it's displaying the map. And I click on the pin, it gives me the title, the business name, and the description. If I do a search, let's just use that postcode. It returns the search results on the map. In this case, I can click on the pin and go to the record. It also displays a list of the results as well. It will only return results for the records that actually have a map data associated with them. So if I go back to my directory records, if I go into the first record, that one doesn't have any map data associated with it, so it won't return that data, that map. And if you do the postcode search, the other thing you notice is that neither of the records are showing the telephone field. So with directories, if there's no data within a field, then it won't display that field on the front end on the record. It will only display fields that you actually have data recorded in for that record. Now, the other way to set up a directory is you can actually do a a CSV import. So if I go to directories, so let's say I've got a directory with thousands of records that I need to set up. I don't really want to go in and have to do that all manually, but I might have a CSV file with all of the data in. So I could go in and create a new directory. Let's do the same thing. It's got local businesses. Let's got this import. Again, this initial steps are exactly the same. So I'll assign my categories, my metadata. Let's not allow public submission this time, and I'll leave the description. But if I save my main settings, now at this point, rather than going in and creating the fields, I'm going to go straight to the import tab. And I've got a CSV file that I'm going to upload. So when I configure the import, I can determine whether I'm importing data into the directory, or whether I'm just using an import to set up the fields. Most often than not, it will be data. And what this will do is if you've got a header row in your CSV file, it will use that row to generate the field titles for you. Field terminator, you don't normally need to change. You can select which column in your CSV file you want to use for the main record titles. So in this case, I'll use column A because I know that's my first column that I've got the business name in. What I want the live status of the records to be when I import them. Am I importing categories? I'm going to say no. Am I importing metadata? Let's say no. You can add additional columns into your CSV file. If you're using categories within your directory, for example, you can pop the category IDs in that field, or you can add some metadata into fields as well, and you can populate them via an import. I'm just doing a very simple one. So at this point, I'll choose my file. And then I'll click save, and it will give me a message to say the directory import's been added to a queue. It normally takes about 10 minutes, depending on how big your CSV file is. If it's got tens of thousands of records in it, it's likely to take longer than 10 minutes, but 10 minutes is when the scheduled task is likely to kick off. So rather than waiting, I'm just going to jump back to my list. And I've got one I set up earlier. So this is one that I imported records for earlier. I've not done anything else to it. But you'll see if I go to records, there's only one record in my import. So it's actually created a record for me. And on import, it's also generated all of the fields. Now, when you import a directory records as CSV file to set the directory up, when it generates the fields, it will generate them all as text boxes, but you can then simply just go in and change them. So for example, with my location, I want that to be a map. So I could go in and I can just change that to a Google map. So before I save that, if I make the directory live, just show you how it currently appears. So here's my current record. I can go in and I can then change those fields. So I'll make the location field Google Map field. So then that'll give me the ability to add data to my record. If I had a location field in here with, I think in my CSV file, it's just an empty field, but so it will have generated it in the background. But if there was a postcode in there, then it would automatically then display that as a location when I go into the record. So sometimes if it's a very large directory that you're creating, and you do have the data already in a spreadsheet, then the easiest way to generate it is by dropping in a CSV import and doing it that way. So I've got another question. If you put postcode into keyword, will it bring up one record? if I put it in, because I've got the same postcode on both records, it should bring them both up. If I put the postcode in the directory, obviously this is looking for a specific postcode though. So that should bring back both records. It's not, I think there's something wrong with my last record. Let me just have a quick look. I think I posted let me get back to the other directory. Let's try it. There we go, it's returned both records, but only one is showing on the map. Normally with postcode, you'd be putting in your postcode or the postcode you're visiting that you want to look for resources nearby. So it's unlikely it's going to be a direct match for what's in the record. So we've run through the basics of creating a directory manually, creating a directory via an import. One of the other things you may want to do in a directory is you might want to provide extra filtering options. So if I've got something like a business directory, let me go into the imported one that I've done. You might want to organize the records by type of business to give people another way of searching for something, in addition to the A to Z and the keyword search. So I can go in and create a category taxonomy that's specific to the directory. And this can have categories and subcategories. So I might create some categories in here, say software, retail. Let's add some subcategories to retail. So this then on the front end will then give me filter options. I can drill in and search through the directory. So at the moment, there's no records under those filters. So if I go to a record and I go back into assign categories, you'll see I've got a navigation category, but I also have this option to select a directory category. So in the top left, I can change from navigation to my local business category structure. And I can select and add categories in the same way that I do main categories in the platform. So if I then apply that and then save my record, I go into software now. It's refreshing. Did I add it properly? Let me check. Oh, there's a problem. It's lost my metadata. That's probably my fault. It's me. Okay, let's try saving that again. If I go into software now, then I've got my record for Jadu. The other thing you can do with categories within the directory is you can actually add content to appear within the category when you're browsing through the directory. So if I go and grab some content from somewhere, in here, if I go to my overview tab, select a category, I can create adverts for this category, which are very simple sort of image, title, and click-through link. Or I can go in and edit the category itself and just put some content in. So let me just do that. If I save that and then refresh my category page, you'll see that it presents that content above the list of records. So you can add extra information in that way. Now we take on questions. Okay, no more questions at the moment. Okay. So you can also, if you are intending on editing data significantly within a directory and you need to update a lot of records, you can actually export the data from the directory as well. So there's an export process that would export a CSV file. So you could go in and then maybe make the changes in the CSV file and then re-upload it to replace the data that's there already. And then the last couple of things in terms of directories is you can actually do things with directories using Jadu's Forms platform. So you can actually set forms up to submit details to a directory rather than using the sort of public submission method. You could get a user to submit a record via a form submission. So examples of this might be, I recently did some work for a customer around a recruitment process, and they had an online form to request a job advert that then pushes the job advert details into a Jadu directory, and the directory is used as the jobs board on the website. So in this case, I'm going to work with my business directory. So I've got a basic form that I've created. You'll see I've just added my main fields to replicate what data I'm capturing in the directory. So if I want to generate a directory record when this form's submitted, I'm going to create a rule. So let's create a rule. Let's call it form submission actions. So I'll say when the user submits the form, and then I'm going to choose a submit a directory entry option. I can then create a template. Let's give my template a name. When I click next, it will give me a list of directories that are in the system that are live. It won't show directories that aren't live. So I want to push this into my local businesses directory. But let's use the imported version. And then when I select next, it will bring up the fields within the directory on the left-hand side. It always has entry title, but then anything below that will be the fields that you've created when you've set the directory up. And then it's simply a case of me going through and mapping my questions from my directory. Now, quite often you might be tempted to just keep scrolling through this list, but you can actually type in here. And then it will filter it. So I've got business name, put that in as the entry title, and the business name in the record. I've got my description field. So I've got a plain option and an HTML option. Location, address. Obviously, it might be, I've just added a sort of HTML field for adding the address in. If you were using an address lookup, you could map this to the label that's returned from part of the lookup. So I've got my fields in my directory mapped to my question responses in the form. Let me save that. Now, I could then go in and add any additional rules that I might want. So if I was raising a case in Jadu Connect, I could add that in as an action. I could then add my confirmation page, my customer emails, maybe my internal notifications if I need to. But I'll just leave it with that one record in there. What I also have the option to do is configure an alert. So if this action fails, it can send me a notification. So if I select that, I can then add a notification either instantly or as part of a daily digest. So let's say I want to know straight away if an action fails, and I want it to come to my user details. I can then add that. So if someone submits a form and it fails to create the record, it will send me an email to tell me that that's happened. Okay. So if I go in and fill in my form, just add some text in. I can then do my location search and just grab the postcode. As always, if the pin's not quite in the right place, I can move it around. Let's put it there where the dock is. And I'll just leave it at that for now. So if I then go next, you'll see that it's producing the latitude longitude coordinates from the map pin. But if I submit that form, it should then drop that into the directory. So if I go back to my directory, there we can see my record that's waiting to be approved, that's come in from a form submission. And just make that 5. The other thing you can do in relation to directories in forms is if you want to pull data from a directory into a form submission, there is logic that allows you to do that. So if I go back to my form, logic, let's create a new logic. Under predefined logic, there's directory's value of a field. So what I would do is point this at my directory, choose the field that I want to return. So I can search against the directory using a value. So maybe it's business name. So I'll point it at business name. The value in my form is business name. So I want to match these. So when someone puts the business name into the form, it's going to search against the directory to see if there's a record that matches that business name. And then I can ask it to return a field. So in this case, I might have a hidden field to indicate whether that business already exists in the directory or not. So I could pull that back. Let's say that's the telephone field. And then I can create a branching rule in the form to take someone to a dead end if depending on what that returns from that hidden field in the directory. Or you can use it to pull back values for comparison. If you're wanting to do that in a form where you maybe need to match something up to confirm something. If you've got a job application form, you might be pulling back the expiry date for job submissions from the directory record and then matching the current date against that. So, and that's a sort of overview of directories in a nutshell. So let's see what other questions we've got. On the live view of records. Okay, so when you export the directory and re-import it, will it keep the original record ID? No, it won't. It will change the record IDs because it treats it as creating the content again, effectively. Live view records, do the URLs now include the parent directory and category? So it can be used with. So if I go in, so the URL just includes the record details, but directories now sit within the category structure. So historically on the legacy Jadu template sets, directories always sat just underneath the home in the breadcrumb trail, but now they actually sit within the main breadcrumb in the Photon templates. Can a form be submitted directly to a specific category or subcategory within the directory? No, that's not something that's currently possible. Again, if it's something you think would be useful, it's something you can always raise as a suggestion on our suggestions board. And the product team always look at those to determine the roadmap. Okay, well, thanks for everyone's time today. Hopefully we'll see you all at the next session. And as Abby says, let us know if you've got any suggestions. You can just drop an email to marketing@jadu.net, and we'll see if we can include those in future masterclasses. Thanks very much.